Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Big Bout Podcast. This is John Suntress. Man, it's less than 24 hours since Andy Ruiz stopped Anthony Joshua by technical knockout in the 7th round, an explosive 3rd round that looked like it would be curtains for Andy Ruiz. The big guy picks himself up, knocks Anthony Joshua down 2 more times, confuses him for another 4 rounds, and finally the referee stops the contest after Joshua kind of seems to quit in his corner. What the hell just happened? I'm still trying to figure it out. Hats off to Eddie Hearn, who I thought was incredibly gracious in the post-fight press conference. I guess hats off to Joshua, who was very much a gentleman, as he congratulated Ruiz in the ring. And wow, Andy Ruiz, our first Mexican heavyweight champion, a legitimate one with 3 belts. The heavyweight apple cart has suddenly become upset, and now there are even more questions than before. Does Ruiz go through with the Joshua rematch? Who knows? It'll be very interesting in the days ahead. But I wanted to get some instant analysis, so I picked things up with my buddy Dave Schuster from The Score, the Chicago sports talker here, and a longtime fight fan and a regular here on the Big Bout Podcast. Had to sit down with him, find out what he thought. It was an interesting card as well, and we get into that, but mostly the focus for this episode is the Joshua Ruiz fight, or we should say now the Ruiz-Joshua fight, as Andy Ruiz takes his place among the other heavyweight kings in Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. What's next? Well, before we get to what's next, let's review what happened last night with Dave Schuster on the Big Bout Podcast. Welcome back to the Big Bout Podcast. This is John Suntress, formerly of Boxing Illustrated, currently online with you, talking about boxing, and I'm happy to welcome back for a review of Anthony Joshua and Ruiz Jr. Holy crap. Who expected it? But from the Score, Dave Schuster. Welcome, Dave.
Well, welcome back to you, Johnny. And yeah, that was fun last night.
Yeah,
it was unexpected, but yet it was fun. And I really loved seeing a lot of the faces of some of the people at ringside going, "Oh my FFF God, did we just see?" In retrospect, I guess I'm not all that surprised. I didn't pick Ruiz to win the fight, but after seeing him in his previous fight, I actually was impressed with him. I didn't think that he was going to take down Joshua last night. The real story for me last night, and I'm sure you'll concur with this, is that Anthony Joshua, as boxers at some juncture in their careers happens, he was exposed in a lot of ways, unfortunately. And in the end, he didn't have the stamina. He definitely didn't have the chin. And I didn't think he actually got that hard, but it wasn't, I wasn't getting hit by a 270-pound man. But
exactly.
He was exposed. He couldn't take the punch. He ran out of gas. And the worst thing I can say about him, unfortunately, is that he didn't want to fight after all that. And I hate to use the word, but I'll say it. He quit at the end.
He did quit at the end. I'm of 2 minds, Dave, and I don't blame you for saying he's been exposed. And obviously the dogs disagree with you as well because I heard them barking, and that's okay. Don't feel like honestly. I always say that's part of podcasting. If there's dogs or whatever surface noise, so be it. But no, I think. Well, first of all, Joshua in his last few fights, and Bill Detloff made this point online, and I agree with him. We talk about when Mercury is in retrograde. Joshua has been in retrograde ever since the Klitschko fight. He has been showing less and less. And I think might be outcoached from his own natural abilities. So and then really one of the things I wanted to address too is like how does Joshua kind of regroup? But I mean, in fairness, Lennox Lewis had 2 embarrassing losses to guys that he had no business losing to, and then he came back. One of them, Chicago's own Oliver McCall, and of course the Hasim Rahman fight. But I agree with you; he did quit, and at first when the referee stopped the fight, I'm like, oh, man, he should have let Joshua get knocked down one more time or whatever. But I also think Joshua was kind of milking the clock and kind of just like, oh, man, and just kind of shaking his head like whatever. And it's like, hey, you're in the fight. It was the first Rocky Apollo Creed fight come to life because you got that moment when Tony Burton, the actor, tells Carl Weathers in the corner, he doesn't know this is a show. He thinks it's a damn fight. And that's exactly what happened, and especially, much like in the Rocky movie, after the first knockdown, where Joshua was able to put Ruiz down, suddenly he went in cruise control. And okay, This is going to end when I want it to end. And I got to say, in fairness, and really, I want to point out that you and I both were kind of right in some ways, because we're both like, hey, Ruiz can punch. Mm-hmm. And let's not forget that. He is a decent puncher, and he's shown that he can go the distance with bigger guys. And I think all that going in now, and then, of course, both of us are like, hey, and of course I said, hey, I love an upset. It would be great. I don't think it's going to happen, but it would be wonderful. Sometimes don't wish for what you want, because it might come true. And like I said, I'm of two minds about this fight, because on the one hand, I'm like, oh, this is great, and I love an upset, because this always screws everyone's plans up. But then by the same token, it's like, like you said, Joshua was kind of exposed. I think he can be, I think he can go back to the drawing board and really consider his strategies moving forward. By the same token, you can't take anything away from Ruiz. I mean, my God, he comes in. I mean, weren't you expecting another, I hate to say it, like Joe Hip or Buster Mathis Sr., some of these, or Buster Mathis. I am thinking, I'm combining the two. Buster Mathis back in the day when fat heavyweights that were okay, but weren't world beaters and stuff. But then we forget about good fat fighters like Tony Tubbs and Greg Page, who can come in with a gut and still show some skill and win.
Well, first of all, Ruiz, take a look at not only his professional record, which was 32-1. The only loss was a razor-thin decision to Joseph Parker in another title challenge.
Yep.
So, I mean, he's so stiff. He also had a very extensive amateur career, and, he was trained to box since the age of 5 or 6.
100%.
Now, I haven't seen all that many fights of Andy Ruiz, but I did see his last fight before this one just 6 weeks ago, and I was impressed.
Yeah.
He can punch. He can move for a big dude, and you can make all kinds of fun of him. Not you personally, but other people say, and Stephen A. Smith came across as a real idiot after last night's fight. We can talk about that too.
What did he say?
Well, not only was he an idiot with his post-fight comments, but I love some of the comments of people ripping him. But, he basically made fun of Joshua losing to a guy like Butterbean. I think that's what he referred to Andy Ruiz. And that's just not fair. Andy Ruiz, again, probably overweight, but although,
Definitely
what,
overweight.
he moved a lot better and had more stamina and looked like a better athlete than Anthony Joshua did last night.
Man. Absolutely. Go on. Yes.
So, I mean, he had a record of 32-1 with 23 knockouts, give or take, something like that. Yeah. He had an extensive amateur career. He could move. He could counterpunch, and that's why he won last night's fight. He counterpunches beautifully. The first 2 rounds, not that much. It was very, feel-out process.
Sure.
But then in round 3, after he got dropped, and that was a legitimate left hook on the part of Anthony Joshua, but he got right back up. And he took it to him. And that's what as a fan of boxing, that's what I always want. You know what? You got hit, take it right back at him, fight him back. And he destroyed Joshua in the long run. That's what he did last night. He destroyed him.
He made him quit. No, you're 100% right, Dave.
Yeah.
And also, he walked down a big man. So now, God, all of a sudden, it's like, well, can't you see him walking down Tyson Fury? My answer is yes, and has enough power that I think Tyson Fury would kind of dump his pants if he had to fight Ruiz. And also, hey, even Deontay Wilder, it's now, and again, I mean, Ruiz can take a punch. I mean, that's the other thing, is the guy can definitely take a punch. So, I mean, yes, he is out of shape. I mean, honestly, at the weigh-in, there was that one picture of them kind of face-to-face, and I really did feel like Ruiz was sucking in his gut, just kind of in that way that Buster Douglas did before the second Holyfield fight, and they announced that he was 242, and it's like, ooh. But no, man, again, you're right. The guy can move. He can walk down a big man. He can counterpunch. He can take a punch. And he's got clearly has power. I mean, this is, dare I say it, this Joe Bag of Donuts heavyweight might be a dangerous guy that all 3 men are going to have to think about, because, and it'll be very interesting. I mean, literally, we're talking less than 24 hours after the fight. We'll see what happens, because if I'm Ruiz's management, I'm thinking very carefully about, I got a rematch clause. But hell, contracts are made to be broken in boxing. Certainly Douglas did it back in the day, walking away from King and Tyson, and going off to fight Holyfield. This in the best possible way, because we were sleepwalking, I think, up to this point in the heavyweight division with everything that's already been laid out. Not only Wilder facing Luis Ortiz, but already that the Fury fight would be the next fight and everything. And it's like, okay, this is all mapped out. When is Joshua going to get into the mix? Well, he just, dealt himself out of the mix. Yes, they're going to have if all goes through with the contract, they will fight again before the end of the year. We'll see what happens, but I think it's a very interesting place, and good on Ruiz for an amazing fight.
Yeah, Eddie Hearn said after the fight that will be the next fight. It will be the rematch, but there's always a but. And Andy Ruiz and his management said, not so fast.
There you go.
Excuse me. And, now that he's got 3 belts, who knows what the mandatory will be, and who knows, what kind of conversations go on behind the scenes. And you know what? He might just let Anthony Joshua sit and stew about this for a while before they have a rematch. He might take, some other – I don't know who he would fight. Maybe
that's the thing. But that's the thing, Dave. I mean, really, because, you're right. We'll see what the governing bodies do. But honestly, Dave, and it's great that Joshua had collected 3 belts as he had. And that is a legitimate claim, having 3 titles like that. But, at the end of the day, I still think the governing bodies are really meaningless. We've got our top 3 heavyweights, and now, you could have argued that Joshua was number 1. Well, he certainly isn't anymore. And now it's a real question of, he's probably, definitely 4th. You got to throw Ruiz in there in the mix as being the guy that beat Joshua and everything. And it's a very interesting heavyweight picture. And no, everything shouldn't be laid out. And no, it's a done deal. It's going to be very. And I like Eddie Hearn because I appreciate what he's trying to do with DAZN and trying to make matches, trying to make affordable boxing again for fans. And signing up the guys that he did to try and make these fights happen, the way he signed Triple G after already signing, and now I'm blanking. Canelo, thank you very much. I always blank. I don't know why I blank when I talk to you sometimes. but yeah, that's the thing. It's an exciting heavyweight picture all of a sudden. And I have a feeling that before our next podcast, we'll have more information on what direction Ruiz will go into. But Anthony Joshua, do you think he should switch trainers? I do. I think he needs to go back to the basics and really, kind of shake things up because, as I said, he's been in retrograde for the last couple fights. And what made me pay attention to Anthony Joshua when he beat Vladimir Klitschko, as he did, he's seemed less and less impressive in each fight since.
Yeah, there's no question, and obviously there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking talking about Anthony Joshua. Matter of fact, the Monday morning quarterbacking was literally 5 minutes after the fight last night. And you heard all those people say, well, he needs to dump his trainer and he needs to change. And I can't remember some of the names that were thrown out there. Emmanuel Stewart's protege was his name was brought up.
Yes.
And listen, I think those guys would do him some good because the one thing that Anthony Joshua has an incredible advantage over a guy like Andy Ruiz is his reach. I mean, he did not use his jab, obviously, like a really good heavyweight should against a smaller in stature guy. That's why I think of all the heavyweights, I agree with you. Wilder will just go in swinging wild punches, and whoever lands one wins the fight against Ruiz. Tyson Fury, though, is a much more polished boxer. Even though he's bigger than all of them, he knows how to use the jab. He knows how to clutch. Ruiz would have actually the toughest time against Tyson Fury because of his boxing expertise. Now, so Anthony Joshua does need some different training methods and different trainer period to get, more out of him. But the one thing, and I don't care if the second coming of God, Emmanuel Stewart, comes back to life, is not going to change about Anthony Joshua is the fact that his chin is not that good. And eventually, I don't care if it's against Andy Ruiz or somebody else, if he gets tagged, he's going down. And that's happened more often than not lately. It's happened. I mean, it happened with the Klitschko fight. It's happened in fights since the Klitschko fight. And if he can't take a punch, then that's not a good sign.
Well, I'll point to the Klitschko fight that he was able to get up and regroup. Well, he did more than get up. He won. And, I mean, that's the thing. So I agree. He was ice cold for this fight. He obviously didn't take Ruiz seriously. I do think it's fair to say that the chin is in definite question. I wouldn't go so far to say it's like Tommy Hearns, hit him right and he's done. Because, again, pointing to that Klitschko fight, where I thought Klitschko fought his ass off and certainly had enough power and had shown it in previous fights. Styles make fights, man. He was not ready for Ruiz's style. Ruiz was a last-minute... I'm not making apologies, but it's, again, he wasn't expecting the counterpunching, the fast hands, and the power that Ruiz has. He took him lightly. He definitely took him lightly. And, again... obviously the two knockdowns really did freak him out. While I do think that he needs to regroup, I'm not ready to write him out yet because, as I said, Lennox Lewis had 2 embarrassing losses and still managed to become a great heavyweight champion despite that. They also pointed, 2 of my favorite writers, Nigel Collins and Graham Houston, were pointing out, hey, Patterson lost twice. Lost obviously to Johansson, was able to come back and win. They mentioned Lennox Lewis. I can't remember some of the other heavyweights. Certainly Joe Louis with Max Schmeling. That's the thing, man. So I am willing, and I think that Joshua is enough of an athlete that I'm willing to give him another shot and another break before I'm ready to write him out. But that said, as you point out, Ruiz has been boxing since he was a kid. Joshua does not have the extensive fight career. Despite being an Olympic champion, he did come to boxing late, and it's, my buddy Mike Choi and I were talking about it. There are athletes that convert to boxing, and then there are guys that have been boxing since day one. Ruiz is one of those guys. It's going to be very interesting to watch both of these guys moving forward, and that's what made last night entertaining and leaves us with all these great questions to ask in the months ahead.
Yeah, my last thought on Anthony Joshua, and I'm not writing him off. Listen, I've been impressed by him in the past. I was not impressed with him last night.
Well, sure.
And a lot of people were even talking about his body language, entering the ring and a length of time in the locker room beforehand.
Yeah, it was weird.
It was weird, and so maybe the atmosphere. Who knows? Those are terrible excuses if that's the case. And Eddie Hearn actually made a fan of me last night because he made no excuses.
No.
He really came off to me sincere and honest after last night's fight. And listen, I know promoters are not the most honest people, but he made a fan of me last night because I thought he was very honest and he made no apologies whatsoever. The only thing further I wanted to say about Anthony Joshua, and again, I'm not writing him off because I have been impressed with him in the past in a lot of his fights, not last night again. But here, like I said, his chin is questionable. You can't debate that. And,
sure.
and I don't want to equate him, but I'm going to bring up an analogy. Amir Khan is a really good boxer, fast hands, but he's got that bad chin.
Yeah.
And that bad chin never goes away. Now, it might not crop up in every fight because he might not get hit with it, but that bad chin, if it's exposed once, it'll be exposed again at another time. And so, therefore, that is always going to be a question mark with Anthony Joshua for me going forward.
Well, like I said, and I thought of another heavyweight that had to come back from an embarrassing loss. Wladimir Klitschko, when he lost to Corey Sanders. Nobody was expecting that. Second-round knockout. And you could question Wladimir Klitschko's chin, and then he goes on to have, I don't know the number of how many title defenses, certainly around the amount that Joe Louis had. That's the thing. So while I agree, I think, and again, it's fair to point out, and certainly Deontay Wilder must be licking his chops after last night. I can't wait, and let's make it happen. It's going to be very, very interesting. I just wanted to add this real quickly when Sure.
you talk about Wilder and we talked about Tyson Fury. Did you see the post-fight comments from both those guys?
Tell me.
How different they were? Incredibly different. Deontay Wilder was making fun of Joshua
Sure.
and saying basically he was a fraud and this and that and whatever. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And actually, Fury, on the other hand, was sympathetic and said that's boxing, which it is, of course.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to see the difference in how both those guys talked about what happened last night with Anthony Joshua.
Well, ever since Tyson Fury fought Deontay Wilder, he has impressed me with his poise, and because he used to be a loud, angry heavyweight in a lot of ways, and a lot more bragging than actual, showing it in the ring. But during that Wilder fight, and certainly afterwards, I kind of, and we all know that he does have depression problems. Maybe he's getting the help that he needs, and has finally been able to put things in perspective. Wilder is still relying on his power. Wouldn't you like to see Ruiz fight Wilder? Because
sure.
I would love to. I have a sneaking suspicion that Ruiz might be able to handle the Mack truck power of Deontay Wilder, and he is Tony Galento. Let's go back to the 30s. He is Tony Galento with a game plan, because I saw ESPN Classic when they would run The Way We Were, I think it was, or The Way It Was, the old Kurt Gowdy show, where they would get old athletes on and they would, talk about great moments in the past. And they'd get DiMaggio to talk about 41 and the hitting streak or whatever. Well, he had Joe Louis and Galento, and this is in the early 70s, talking about their fights. And Louis said, hey, I had my troubles with Jersey Joe Walcott, and certainly Billy Conn gave me trouble for 13 rounds. He goes, but this little guy over here, pointing to Galento, was probably my toughest opponent, because when he knocked me down, I really didn't know where I was for a few minutes, and he scared the hell out of me. And it was great. And again, Galento was nothing but power and this stocky, beer-barreled guy that could take a punch and throw a punch. And, even after he fought Lewis, he and Max Baer had a tremendous contender-to-contender fight, kind of a Gotti Ward of its day in the heavyweight division. That's the thing. I think... God, hats off to Ruiz, honestly, and proving all of us wrong. And even though those of us who knew that he could punch and go a bit of a distance, but this was all set up for Joshua. And I think he took a lot for granted in that same way that Lennox Lewis probably did against both Oliver McCall and Hasim Rahman, where they didn't train right, their head wasn't in the right place, or his head wasn't in the right place at the time. But it'll be interesting to see what Joshua does in his next fight, regardless.
I never thought that in any of our podcasts that you or I would ever bring up two-ton Tony Galento. That's what I love about boxing. There's so much rich history that I never thought that would occur. But thank you for that reference. So one thing about Andy Ruiz, and I think we can both sort of end on this. He will come to fight, and you saw it last night. And he did. He showed the Mexican spirit. You could make, not you again, but if somebody wants to make fun of that, but that's exactly what he did. He showed Mexican spirit by getting up and fighting. And I think he would bring that fight to any fight. He might get overwhelmed. Wilder with that right hand could knock anybody out, much less Andy Ruiz. But he will always come to fight, and that's what I became more of a fan of his last night. I was a fan of his watching the fight before that, and again, in retrospect, even though I didn't pick him to win last night's fight, I'm not surprised because he's a fighter. There's no other way of putting it. There were some other really good fights. I hope you saw some of those fights last night as well.
Yeah, but some lousy decisions. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. Starting with the women's fight. Katie Taylor, who was a really, I will admit that, some of the female fights are not my cup of tea, but this was probably the best female fight that I've seen yet. Katie Taylor, who was undefeated coming in against the Belgian policewoman, Delphine Persone, who was 43-1 coming into the fight. So she was, no slouch herself and had not lost a fight since, almost a decade. And I thought the decision was the wrong decision. They gave it to Katie Taylor. And so, that was a really good fight just to get, lick my chops to get the thing going. And then the super middleweight fight, Caleb Smith with I think it was a third round knockout of Hassan Endam. And Caleb Smith is no joke either. And if Canelo Alvarez is thinking about bypassing anybody at 160 and going up to 168, sorry, buddy, you're not going to beat Caleb Smith. I was really impressed with him, and I have been impressed with him. So those are the fights that were on DAZN last night. And there was also a fight on Premier Boxing on Fox Sports 1 that I didn't get around to watching it until this morning. Devin Alexander, former champion, and he lost to a guy who had moved up from 140 to 147, Ivan Redkach, and that was a nice knockout on his part. So once again, as there is almost each and every weekend, Johnny, there were some good fights last night. I love sitting at home and watching these.
No, I hear you, man. I did think that prior to the women's fight, there was another lousy decision. Ray Robinson got jobbed in his welterweight fight against a DAZN house fighter who had no business winning. I mean, it was a competitive fight. But Ray Robinson, I think, really, and it's funny that he's a welterweight and his name is Ray Robinson. Who's got the balls to call himself Ray? I guess, 60 years later, it's okay to call yourself Ray Robinson, I guess. But, and even if it is your real name, I think which it wasn't. Walker Smith was Ray Robinson's real name, the real Ray Robinson. But this guy got jobbed as well last night. I didn't see the Premier Boxing fight. Shame on me. But that's good to hear. And again, yes, I agree with you, man. We are on a streak of very competitive, exciting fights, but unfortunately we're also in line for a lot of house decisions that disappoint me, as the women's fight did and as the Ray Robinson fight did. I'm shrugging. What else can you do? I mean, that is also part of boxing, I suppose. But last night's heavyweight fight is really going to shake things up, and it's very interesting, and it, certainly we'll watch in 2 weeks when Tyson Fury has his fight. And we'll go from there, and then when Deontay Wilder and Ortiz fight later this year. I mean, Ruiz, it's like there's an open book, so it's going to be very interesting to hear in the days and weeks ahead what he chooses to do. So let's reconvene in a few days before Triple G's next fight, and we'll talk about that card and what else is going on this coming weekend. But I really wanted to get on and have a moment to talk about just how crazy last night's fight was, and the things that were exposed, both the positives in the case of Ruiz Jr. and the negatives in the case of Joshua. Pretty crazy stuff, man.
Yeah. Yeah, one last thought on my part.
Sure.
I thought DAZN's coverage last night was pretty much top notch.
Yeah.
It's for $100. This is the best $100 I think I've spent since DAZN came up with the deal that they've made available to people like myself to watch all these fights. And you have a library of fights too that you can go back and watch also from DAZN. So I thought for the most part they did okay. Little disappointed. One of my heroes of all time is Sugar Ray Leonard. He
was stunned. He was stunned. Go on.
Yeah, well, I mean, he doesn't really offer much, unfortunately. His answers are all very short, and there's really not much substance even to his answers. And yes, you're right. He was stunned by what happened in last night.
In the few words that he said, I'm sorry, man, I didn't mean to step on you, but I thought comparing Joshua's fight to his comeback fight to Kevin Howard, I think was a fair comparison. I'm glad you bring up Sugar Ray. I would have forgotten to talk about that because I remember that fight very well. And Kevin Howard, as you said, he came to fight because he knew this was his chance. And he put Ray Leonard on his ass. And that was one of the greatest, absolutely live team moments. They zoom in on Leonard, and Leonard is like, what am I doing on my butt? And letting this guy, who I should be able to beat easily, get the best of me. And to Ray's credit, he kept going. Obviously, again, Joshua, that's the most embarrassing thing, not getting knocked down. And I think that's why Ray was surprised the way Joshua kind of quit. I mean, it's dumb, or I don't know. I can't get inside Joshua's head. Obviously, Eddie Hearn didn't even know how to respond to that as well. Everyone's just kind of looking around like this is. I wish we could explain. And I agree with you. I think Hearn was incredibly sincere for a promoter in his post fight comments as well. But yeah, I thought they did a good job. When you say $100 for DAZN, what do you mean?
Well, that's all I paid for the whole year, $100.
Oh, okay.
Which is what, $8?
Yeah, I guess so.
No. I mean, a lot of people pay for individual fights like $19.99, but the deal that I signed up for, I'm hoping it's annual. To be honest with you, it's $100, and I can watch boxing 24/7. I think it's fantastic.
Well, I didn't do the math, but I have heard that DAZN is thinking about raising their rates near the end of the year, their monthly, the monthly thing. And I bought the upfront $100 too, I guess. I don't know. I do appreciate the fact that we are getting pay-per-view level fights on DAZN, that if you're paying a monthly rate. I mean, again, that's where WWE does it right. If you subscribe to the WWE, you get the pay-per-views. I don't know if domestically it was offered beyond DAZN. I don't think it was here in the States. I know that in England it was available via pay-per-view. But their pay-per-views, as Hearn has pointed out as well, are much cheaper than American ones. And he's even said it. He's like, I can't believe the amount of money the promoters expect fans to pay here in America for boxing. He goes, British fans don't have to pay that much for pay-per-view. And I'm glad he said that. It's true. And that's why I get really angry when Crawford fought Amir Khan and it was a pay-per-view. It's like, come on, you're not getting my money for that crap. I'm sorry. That's BS. And the same thing, too, when Pacquiao fought Adrian Broner. It's like, look, that's a competitive fight, but you are charging way too much money. That's when I head to a bar, and I know I'm only going to pay like a $20 or maybe $25, upfront charge and stuff like that. I'm not buying that for the home when it's $75 to $100 for a pay-per-view. That's obscene. That's what scared me for a second when you said $100. But go ahead.
No, $100 for the end for the zone. It'll be interesting to see what Pacquiao and when Thurman when they fight. When is that? That's probably going to be $69 or $79. It's not worth it.
No way. I bet $75 minimum. I think I'd be shocked.
Minimum.
Yeah, I think minimum. And we'll see.
Okay.
But I hope I'm wrong. I hope you're right, Dave. But I'm just telling you, man, it just seems like Showtime, Top Rank, Premier Boxing, those guys that still invest in pay-per-view, they are choking us, and they are moose. Let me put it in Archie Andrews' comic book terms. They are moose shaking us down, grabbing us by our ankles and shaking all the change out of our pockets. This is not good. And again, it really gets me angry. I think going to the subscription base is the way to go. It's the way most television is going anyway. And I think all of us fight fans don't mind paying a reasonable monthly fee to get our boxing. But, man, I'll tell you, just like the BS of the Alphabet Boys when it comes to their belts and what they call champions and championship fights, and they send out multiple belts for the same weight class and stuff like that, it's buyer beware, and it's like you really got to pick and choose and say, okay, this is a top matchup. I'll spend money on this. Compared to, no, this is a great fighter fighting a great name that hasn't been great for years. I'm not spending my money on that. Now, I think Thurman and Pacquiao is a good matchup because, as I keep saying, I think Pacquiao is the 21st century Sugar Ray Robinson in that he's still going in his 40s, still very much a threat, but obviously not the same fighter he used to be.
Well, we'll talk about that one when it crops up. Sure. And again, we'll talk about the Triple G fight coming up against Steve Rolls this coming next weekend, actually, in fact. So I look forward to that. And Johnny, as always, I appreciate being part of this with you.
No, thanks, buddy. Thanks for coming on, and thank you for listening to the Big Bout Podcast.